Hi, Mike here at the Guitar Bar, and today we're going to discuss Gibson's LC Century of Progress model and how history intersects with this utterly unique 1930s instrument. The aptly named Century of Progress model was designed expressly to be showcased at Chicago's 1933 World's Fair of the same name. And while dimensionally the LC is identical to the LOO model, visually it couldn't be more distinct. We can't stress enough how relatively prototypical the steel string flat top acoustic guitar was for Gibson when the Century of Progress model was released. In fact, it was only 1926 when Gibson rolled out their first line of flat top steel strings with the LOO, L1, etc. The world into which the Century would arrive was just starting to see the effects of steel string guitar as a focus of 20th century music. Jazz and country as genres were in their formative stages. Radio was just entering its second decade. RCA had just rolled out the 33 1/3 record in 1931, and America was in the middle of the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, Gibson was making guitars for catalogs and other companies under a variety of names, including Kalamazoo, Cromwell, and Recording King. All told, there were as many as 30 brands that Gibson produced during the Great Depression that didn't bear the Gibson name on the peghead. This was a way to offer a less expensive product geared for the economic realities of the time without devaluing the Gibson name. Gibson even made wooden toys at their Kalamazoo factory to keep people employed and to keep product moving to merchants. These endeavors represented low-cost products that people could afford. So with the Century of Progress model, Gibson was sure to make a splash given its upper-tiered feature set. Its aesthetic and price point contrasted sharply with the majority of Gibson's output in the era. Celebrating 100 years as a city, Chicago's 1933-34 World's Fair put an international spotlight on the Midwest. And with Gibson's Kalamazoo factory less than 200 miles away, they were a natural fit. A nexus of cultural showcase and technological exposition, the World's Fair as a construct provided a unique function in the 20th century. And it was an ideal platform for America to showcase their biggest brands. Now, it's the 1930s, so plastic is the future. And the pearloid fretboard on the Century of Progress model might seem laughable by today's standards, but it was revolutionary in its time. What cracks me up about this fretboard is that the Brazilian rosewood we hold so dear as a tone wood is inlaid into the pearloid plastic, which itself is inlaid with actual mother of pearl. This motif would also extend to the headstock face with Gibson's pre-war script logo. Beyond the fingerboard, Gibson really rolled out the classics in terms of tone woods, with an X-braced Adirondack spruce top, curly figured maple back and sides, and a one-piece Honduran mahogany neck with a deep V profile carve. This was also one of Gibson's first models to feature 14 frets clear of the body, something they started flirting with around 1929. This particular example has now lived almost another century since its construction. The only wear on it is some pick scuffing across the guard, a little bit of moisture-related finish loss on the lower bout, yet the frets are practically perfect, and it even has the original chipboard case. The Century lineup wasn't limited to this model, although it was its flagship. Other Century models that Gibson produced included the L75 archtop, an A-style mandolin, and a Hawaiian model. And while at first glance the HG Hawaiian model seems identical to the LC, it actually had a number of different features, including a nut that was almost 2 inches wide and elevated for lap-style guitar work, a flat saddle, and an even bigger neck. The Century of Progress Fair would only last from 1933 to 34, but the LC model would persist in the Gibson catalog until 1941, retired coinciding with the US involvement in the Second World War. Features would remain largely consistent across the LC's production run, with a few small exceptions. The sunburst transitioned from a very tight target burst on the earliest examples to a more traditional sunburst by 1937. The peghead would get a rosewood overlay in 38, and the multiply binding would be reduced to a single ply, also in 38. Gibson's Century of Progress model was certainly a wild guitar in its time, and it's still an odd duck by today's standards. A model that Gibson has reproduced only once. The Century of Progress's legacy was cemented when Gibson issued an Elvis Costello signature model, limited to only 300 pieces worldwide in 2008. Elvis's particular Century was a model from 1936, and it already showcased the broader burst seen in the later 30s. And to date, it's still the only Gibson model to bear Elvis Costello's name. So with this L Century, I just kind of wanted an excuse to talk about World's Fairs. They're one of my favorite subjects, and Seattle is built on a couple of World's Fairs. So we have the 1909 Alaska-Yukon Exposition with buildings that are still on our UW campus, and 1962 World's Fair is the core of the city with the Space Needle Science Museum. So I actually have some personal family history that spans both of these fairs. My Ukrainian and Polish ancestors from the south side of Chicago went to the 1933-34 World's Fair. South side of Chicago, where my family also had a bar, my namesake, Mike, it's a thing, guitar bar, here we are. And with Seattle World's Fair, my dad actually demoed buildings in the area that would become that city center. So it really spans Seattle and Chicago. Those are the two places where my family's based. Just love talking about World's Fairs. Thanks for following along today, and for more on this Gibson model and everything else we have here at the Guitar Bar, please check out mmguitarbar.com.